The final part of our session this morning is our keynote address. Romilly Madew AO is CEO of Infrastructure Australia. Romilly is responsible for overseeing Infrastructure Australia's critical role in helping governments prioritise the projects and reforms that best serve our Australian communities. It's been a very busy year for Infrastructure Australia, and they are playing an important role advising the federal government on infrastructure priorities, and particularly as we respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and its various impacts. Please join me in welcoming Romilly Madew.
Thank you very much, Tom. I really appreciate the kind introduction. I'm coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri land here in Canberra. We're down here for a few days, so I'd like to pay my respects and acknowledge the custodians of the land and the waterways, and where we're all meeting today. And as I said, I'm here in Canberra, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge my fellow speakers, the Honourable Paul Fletcher, Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts, and Andrew Giles, who just spoke, Shadow Minister for Urban Infrastructure. And I also want to extend my thanks to Michael and the entire AHURI team. We've really appreciated and valued AHURI's contribution as a partner in the development of our advice on Australia's urban and social infrastructure needs, an area which is increasingly critical as we move to a new COVID normal. Today, I'm proud to provide an overview of the 2021 Australian Infrastructure Plan, an incredibly comprehensive and wide-reaching reform document, unlike anything that has ever been published in Australia before. The 2021 plan is intended to support the Australian government's objectives for infrastructure to deliver social and economic benefits, shape productive and livable cities, and provide connectivity to regional and remote areas. The reforms in this landmark document are designed to be practical and actionable, and are focused on supporting the national COVID-19 recovery and delivering the infrastructure our communities need. Spanning the transport, energy, water, telecommunications and digital, waste and social infrastructure sectors, our recommendations prioritise community and user outcomes, while also considering costs and risks in implementation. As many of you would be aware, this is the first time the Australian Infrastructure Plan has included social infrastructure such as schools, hospitals, parks, community centres and social housing. This acknowledges the critical role these physical spaces and assets play in supporting the nation's wellbeing and economic prosperity, and in making Australia a great place to live. It also reflects how a growing and ageing population, technological advances and major events such as natural disasters and the pandemic are changing how Australians live and work. More than ever, Australians appreciate the value of social infrastructure in supporting our communities. And as we continue to rebuild from the pandemic, we have a real opportunity to deliver social infrastructure that supports more equitable access to services and improves quality of life. An opportunity to deliver future-focused social infrastructure that opens up new possibilities for making Australia a healthier, more socially cohesive and economically productive nation. The pandemic has highlighted the need to strengthen our social infrastructure sector and apply lessons learned from the past 2 years to transform the sector and deliver infrastructure that is fit for purpose, digitally equipped and flexible. With this in mind today, I will highlight the need for a robust, nationally consistent framework to capture and measure the real economic value of social infrastructure. This is critical to support effective and balanced investment. But first, I want to take a step back and highlight the social infrastructure challenges that our recommendations in the 2021 plan seek to respond to, as well as some of the additional pressures that have been brought about by the COVID pandemic. The 2021 plan is the reform response to the 180 challenges and opportunities identified in our 2019 Australian infrastructure audit. Some of you may remember reading about the audit when it was published 2 years ago. The audit found that overall, Australia has high-performing social infrastructure by international standards. However, high-quality service delivery is a significant challenge in a country where social infrastructure is located in disparate geographies and where our communities have very diverse needs. A real challenge for us is that access and service quality vary from different infrastructure types, places, and groups of Australians. Our community research found that Australians rate their experience with social infrastructure differently across sectors. And although the quality of social services is high, the assets that deliver them are often old and no longer suitable. For instance, over a quarter of Australians think that the quality and accessibility of social housing have declined over the past 5 years. The audit identified a general lack of appropriate social housing of the right type and in the right location. Noting that poor housing conditions, such as overdue maintenance or overcrowding, can create cross-sectorial impacts on other types of infrastructure, such as health, education, and justice. Ageing school assets was also identified as a key issue in the audit, with quite a large maintenance backlog for school assets and a lack of modern 21st century learning environments with flexibility to embrace new technologies and teaching methods. Now, remember, I'm talking about the audit from 2019, and that didn't obviously take on the changes that we've seen in the last 2 years because of COVID. We also looked at how green and blue recreation infrastructure is functioning. We found there are pressures in urban areas, in both inner cities and on the urban fringe, in connecting green assets in particular. The 2019 audit also found that Australians often access multiple and overlapping services, pointing to a need for better integration between social infrastructure providers. Adding another layer of complexity is, of course, the pandemic, which put additional pressure on our social infrastructure sectors. As we acknowledge in the 2021 plan, COVID pandemic exposed vulnerabilities across the sector and highlighted the need to strengthen it. We saw additional pressure on critical health facilities, with vast amounts of specialised medical equipment and supporting infrastructure needed. ICU capacity was made 7 times larger, and the number of ventilators more than doubled. Meeting these needs highlighted the value of having adaptable facilities that can quickly respond to vital community needs. The pandemic also put pressure on social and affordable rental housing. The economic downturn strained a system that was already severely restricted and highlighted the shortage of fit-for-purpose dwellings, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales. Over the next 15 years, it is projected Australia will need 730,000 new social housing properties, with demand significantly outpacing investment. COVID also had a devastating impact on the arts and culture sector. Once thriving, the sector contributed more than $115.2 billion to the economy in 2017-18 and employed 6% of the national workforce. However, 2 years of restrictions on venue capacity, interruptions and lockdowns, as well as domestic and international border closures, have had a serious impact. A more positive trend that came out of the pandemic was the move to more online services that we saw across multiple social infrastructure sectors. In line with the broader trend, our social infrastructure sectors leveraged digital technology. Education quickly turned to online learning for schools, vocational education and universities. There was an accelerated uptake of telehealth so patients could access healthcare. Art and cultural offerings shifted to online digital experiences. However, these changes highlighted the limitations of Australia's digital networks and equitable digital access. Many of you would have heard the expression digital divide. Finally, the pandemic also occasioned what we have termed the return of the neighbourhood, as more people embraced remote working and demand for community spaces grew. Green and blue spaces such as parks and waterways became vitally important for community recreation and maintaining mental health and wellbeing. Governments moved quickly to support this by relocating public spaces, for instance, opening up golf courses to other uses and creating pop-up cycle lanes. However, this highlighted the need for investment and reform to improve access to this kind of local infrastructure for all sections of the community. The 2021 plan details a number of recommendations to harness the potential of our social infrastructure in a post-pandemic world. In particular, we want to see support for new models for delivering services and continued investment in digital. The pandemic provided a unique opportunity to explore, trial, and further develop low-cost service delivery through digital technologies. As well as making access to healthcare, education, arts and culture more equitable, these new service delivery models have significant economic value that should be harnessed. Telehealth alone has the potential to save the healthcare system billions of dollars a year simply by reducing hospital admissions by one annual visit per person. However, to make the most of this opportunity, it is vital that governments continue to invest in smarter digital infrastructure. Facilitating shared use of assets is another key recommendation in the plan. Social infrastructure assets should be multifunctional, so they can be used by different groups for different purposes. Some schools have already established ongoing access arrangements with councils that allow sporting and community groups to use school facilities at agreed times. In return, councils provide funding for capital works or maintenance of the school. This will maximise the value of assets to the community and even generate revenue that can be used to maintain and upgrade these facilities. Of course, another key benefit of this approach is that it provides an alternative to the more resource-intensive option of developing new infrastructure. We also want to see greater emphasis on cross-sector collaborations. To help the social infrastructure sector recover from the profound effects of the pandemic and catalyse on growth, it is also vital to strengthen the connection between arts, culture, sport and tourism. There is an opportunity for all levels of government to actively work together to better align the planning and delivery of arts, cultural and recreational infrastructure. For this approach to be successful, there needs to be coordinated place-based strategic planning that aligns with regional identity statements, which define local attractions, needs and opportunities, and is undertaken in conjunction with land use planning and tourism strategies. The inclusion of arts, cultural and recreational infrastructure in planning for precinct developments and renewal projects clustered around strong transport nodes. Principles that promote multi-purpose use of new and existing facilities to drive economic development through tourism and job creation and diversify the use of community and commercial assets. This will help to ensure the facilities and spaces that are maintained and created are those that best serve the unique needs of each community. Valuing these cross-sector impacts is also critical, which brings me to my final point, which is the need to recognise social infrastructure as economic infrastructure too. Nationally, social service sectors contributed 15% of Australia's GDP in 2020. The sector employed over 3.5 million people, around 1/4 of Australia's workforce. Social infrastructure and the services it supports not only enables Australians to live better lives, it delivers substantial direct and indirect benefits to the nation's economy. We need a nationally consistent approach to identifying and evaluating the quadruple bottom line value of all social infrastructure investments. This will enable us to better demonstrate the economic role it plays and the social benefits that are attached to investing in more housing, education, arts and cultural institutions. In the case of social housing, there is a particular significant opportunity here for reform. We know that delivering safe, stable and appropriate social housing has a flow-on effect, reducing costs to the health, education and justice system. We also know that improving how the wider social and economic benefits of social housing are measured and assessed will help demonstrate the current high levels of demand and in turn support further investment. For this reason, the 2021 plan calls for a robust, nationally consistent and agreed methodology for assessing and quantifying these benefits that fully capture their quadruple bottom line value. This will enable decision makers to better assess social affordable housing projects, justify future investment and deliver a better balanced housing system, which would benefit all Australians. Through the 2021 plan, Infrastructure Australia has set an ambitious vision for reform. In the case of social infrastructure, our vision is for high quality, well-functioning and adaptable social infrastructure that meets a community's changing service needs responsively and efficiently. Investment in social infrastructure is essential for the health, well-being and economic prosperity of Australian communities. Improvement to the planning, design, delivery and use of social infrastructure assets can contribute to a better quality of life for every Australian. By embracing these reforms, Australians can enjoy appropriately designed, future-focused and accessible facilities that improve people's lives. Thank you again to AHURI for inviting me to speak today at the webinar and for your support in this journey to date. I look forward to your questions.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Romilly. We appreciate what you've had to say to us this morning. And we also, again, just want to thank you personally for Infrastructure Australia's sponsorship of our conference today. We really appreciate that. We have time just for one or two, perhaps, very quick questions. So we'll just put a couple of things to you. Firstly, we're really thrilled to see social infrastructure included in the infrastructure plan as well. There's a question here that asks if you can just elaborate on the focus on place within the new infrastructure plan. Do you think this will lead to more local green and blue infrastructure investment priorities for Australia?
I'm just going to break that question down a bit. So one of the things that we had in the plan is 3 cross-cutting themes. One was industry, innovation and productivity. The second one was sustainability and resilience. And the third one was place-based communities. So the way we view place, and place is talked about and captured the whole way through the plan, and place was brought in when we released the orders as well in 2019. So the way we look at place is we want to see land use planning and transport and place and the unique opportunities around communities and taking on board communities' feedback as the place-based approach. So it doesn't just focus on green and blue infrastructure, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. It looks at the whole place, the uniqueness of place, design and taking and decision-making opportunities, but more importantly, good stakeholder engagement of the community. Coming to blue and green infrastructure, critically important. We talk about the importance of that all the way through, both in the sustainability and resilience part of the plan, but also under our place-based and social infrastructure sections of the plan. Blue and green infrastructure is critically important in our cities. We need to protect it, we need to enhance it, and we need to ensure that in any of our major developments that we're taking on, and there's a proportion of blue and green infrastructure and blue infrastructure where it's available, but green infrastructure is critically important. We saw through COVID something like a 30% increase. Sorry, I'm in the hotel. I'll have to ignore it. A 30% increase people attending state and our national parks. The great, really came out of the pandemic is the use of green infrastructure and the focus of green infrastructure. So we really do advocate the importance of blue infrastructure, so maintaining, protecting, but also enhancing the opportunities in the future for blue and green infrastructure. And that's captured in the plan. Okay,
great. Well, thank you. And I indicated to our audience just a moment ago that we will need to wrap it up now after that question. But look, thank you. We do appreciate you joining us live from your hotel in Canberra. We hope you enjoy the rest of your time there. Again, thank you. And also thank you to all of this morning's speakers, to the Minister and to Mr. Giles. I invite our delegates now to take a short break, get yourself some morning tea, a cup of coffee, stretch your legs, and please return to the timeline at 10:45 in order to be ready for the next session. Now, following our break, my colleague at AHURI, Dr. Gina Zappia, who is our Research Program Manager, will be joining you to facilitate the next session. And the theme of our next session is population mobility after COVID-19. So we look forward to a very interesting discussion then with a very interesting panel of guests. So until then, enjoy your break.